It is Wednesday, March 28th, 2018, and this is 3000 NFL Mock Draft. For myself, Kenneth Arthur, is joined by Rob Staton of SeahawksDraftBlog.com, where we get together and discuss the NFL Draft. We've been doing that for a few years, and this year, you know what? I've decided that in 2018, we're going to focus on the 2018 draft. No more talking about 2014 or 2017. Let's just talk about the 2018 draft and that sort of idea, and we'll push forward looking at the 2018 class. We've been discussing it for months and weeks, and the Seattle Seahawks currently picking 18th, and they don't have a second and third round pick, and so their options are somewhat limited. But just looking at the draft in general, I think it'll give us a good idea of what the NFL picture could look like, not just next season, but moving forward, and what proves to be or what could prove to be a pivotal class for a lot of franchises, just because there are 3 to 5 quarterbacks that may get in that first round, if not the top 3 going as quarterbacks, maybe 4 in the top 5 or 6. It'll be an interesting draft with that regards. And then after that, some interesting players outside of quarterback, though kind of maybe a gap in talent outside of the top 12 to 15, and then falling off from there, which makes the second round and the third round, where the Seattle Seahawks do not currently exist, all that much more important. We'll try and we'll talk about whether or not the Seahawks will have that ability to add a day 2 pick again. But Rob, I want to start off talking about the New York Jets and the Indianapolis Colts. They made a trade recently with the Jets moving up from 6 to 3, and the Colts, picking up a 2018 second round pick from the Jets, that's pick 37, a 2018 second round pick from the Jets, that's pick 49, and a 2019 second round pick, which just seems like icing on the cake. I think that you could argue that the Colts could have moved down without that 2019 second round pick, just from the bounty that they get 2 extra second round picks this year, simply to move down 3 picks in a draft where the Colts they'd be fine with any of the top 6 players probably. And even that being said, knowing that they're not likely to draft a quarterback, they're going to get, the second or third, maybe the best non-quarterback in this entire class, which is great for them. And Rob, you've talked about the value in the second round this year. How much do you like this move for the Colts to move down from 3 to 6? And what do you think the Jets were doing? Because they've gotten a lot of criticism for this move.
Well, I think the Jets were just doing what they felt they had to do to get a quarterback in the end. And they either feel very good about 3 quarterbacks in this draft, which is why they moved up to number 3, or they feel pretty confident that the Giants are not going to take a quarterback at number 2, and therefore they're going to get one of the top 2 quarterbacks. So you could look at it in one way. They've spent an awful lot to move up of just a few places to go and get that quarterback. But if they end up finding someone who has the kind of impact that Carson Wentz had, or Deshaun Watson, or having the kind of potential that Patrick Mahomes has shown, and in the next 2 or 3 years, if they have somebody who's leading that franchise, people will soon forget about what they gave up to actually get that player. If it doesn't work out, though, then we're going to look back on this trade in 2 or 3 years and say they gave up an awful lot, and that a rebuilding team put all their eggs in the basket of one particular quarterback. And this is going to determine whether or not Mike McCagnon is going to be the GM for years ahead. He has to get this right. Todd Bowles, as a head coach, I know they've signed new deals, but their future's on the line now. They have to make this pick work. And for the Colts, well, they're in a very similar situation to the Seahawks, really, because they're not giving up on Andrew Luck, and you have to, at least from their position, they seem to be sticking by him. So you have to believe that he's going to get back eventually. They, certainly would hope that that'd be the case. Don't want his career to be over so prematurely. And if that is the case, they've got to build around him. They have very little around the quarterback at the moment. They've got a chance to get a good player at number 6. Could even be Bradley Chubb, who's a much needed pass rusher for them. It could be someone like Quentin Nelson. One of the best players in the draft is going to fall to them, because we certainly feel like at least 3, maybe 4 quarterbacks are going to go in the top 5 or 6 picks. And then they've got 36, 37, and I think it's 49 in round 2. And round 2 is going to be a fantastic round in the draft this year. There's going to be tons of value there at several different positions, and they could get 3 starters in the second round, 4 in total in the first 2 rounds. That'd be a great haul for the Indianapolis Colts. So I think it's a great trade for them.
And with the trades going on, otherwise, how secure do you think the Giants are at number 2? Do you think that they don't want to move down there? In your latest draft, mock draft, you had the Giants taking Saquon Barkley at 2. And if you're sitting there and you're the Buffalo Bills and you want to maybe make a bigger move up to try and secure a top 2 quarterback, or you're the Denver Broncos and Case Keenum's not going to be the answer long term, or you're the Miami Dolphins or whatever, do you think the Giants stay there at 2 for sure? Or is there some thought there that that they could move down? Or do you think, what are your thoughts in terms of drafting a quarterback?
Well, there's definitely some validity to them doing that. It really depends how they view the quarterbacks. So if they see that there's only one really great quarterback in this draft class, let's say it was one of Sam Darnold or Josh Allen, for example, and then that quarterback went at number 1, then it wouldn't make much sense to invest in a quarterback just for the sake of doing so if you didn't believe in them. And especially when you've got players like Saquon Barkley, Bradley Chubb, and Quentin Nelson in this draft class that could all do a job for the New York Giants. So that's one way of looking at it. But if they had multiple quarterbacks, or if the quarterback that they really liked fell to them at number 2, a team like the Giants don't often pick this early in the first round. So it's a rare opportunity for them to go and get a signal caller. So there's definitely a thought process there that makes a lot of sense for them getting a quarterback. I also think there's a thought process there that maybe they want to be competitive now. And if they wanted to, and if they wanted to put another weapon on offense, for example, like Saquon, or if they wanted to replace Jason Pierre-Paul with Bradley Chubb, that would make some sense too. The Giants have to have some kind of a very interesting plan. I'd love to know what their plan is, because if they weren't planning on drafting a quarterback, then why didn't they take the offer from the New York Jets to move down to number 6? They have to feel very good about that number 2 pick for one reason or another, whether that is to get a quarterback or whether they just think, we've got to get Saquon or we've got to get Bradley Chubb. There has to be a reason why they didn't move down. And I don't think they're going to move down now with the Bills, because the Bills own pick number 12. So if you're not willing to move down to number 6, why would you be willing to move all the way down to number 12? I don't think the number 22 pick or whatever it is that Buffalo can offer there, or maybe a future first round, is going to be that tempting for the New York Giants. So that was a great offer for them to move from 2 to 6. They presumably chose to stay at number 2, and there must be a reason for that. So it's going to be fascinating to find out what that reason was.
Yeah, in your last mock draft on March 23rd, you have the Browns taking Sam Darnold, the Giants taking Saquon Barkley, the Jets moving up as they have for Josh Allen, and then you have the trade with Buffalo going, through Cleveland, which I think makes a lot of sense because the Bills clearly are moving up. They've never been shy about moving up. The Browns have never been shy about moving down. They like having extra draft picks. This could get them their extra draft pick in the first round next season. The Browns will already have had a quarterback. So it makes a lot of sense in that sense. And you have Josh Rosen going to the Bills at number 4. And then you've got Quentin Nelson going to the Broncos at number 5. And obviously the Seahawks not in a position to take Quentin Nelson in most scenarios. With that being said, is there any hesitation with a guy like Nelson just based on the fact that interior offensive linemen, the ones that have gone in the top 10 recently with Jonathan Cooper or Chance Warmack have been disappointments, and not that, that all guards must pay the price for those guys being disappointments. But it does seem that you can sort of reach a ceiling with a guard that is somewhat limited, that doesn't feel as rewarding than if you took, say, Bradley Chubb or a Vita Vea or a Denzel Ward, one of the other positions where the reward seems higher. And even if it does not work out, maybe at least took a bigger shot. Any concerns? Obviously, you're not going to feel a lot of concerns with Quentin Nelson because he's going to be a great prospect no matter what you say. But taking a guard that soon, how much do you think that could have a positive effect on any team, including the Broncos?
Well, the thing about this draft class is it's not a very deep class in terms of legit first rounders who would be a first round pick in most classes. There's only a small handful of players who would achieve that. I think you could probably say that about Saquon Barkley. You could say that about Bradley Chubb. Quentin Nelson's one of them. I think Vita Vea is another one as well. But I think with Nelson, you've pretty much got the complete package. He's got the size. He's got the length. He's got the explosive traits that you look from an interior offensive lineman. He's got the playing style and the attitude. I just love everything about him as a player. And I think he's got a Steve Hutchinson capability coming into this league. That's the type of player you'd be expecting to get. Now, nothing's a guarantee. And you're right, the positional value of getting a guard in the top 10 is not that great. If you can get a quarterback, for example, instead, then you're always going to go in that direction. And if you can get a pass rusher like Bradley Chubb instead, again, that's another consideration there, because they impact games perhaps a little bit more depending on what kind of an offense you want to do. If you want to be a physical tone-setting offense that runs the ball a lot, then Quentin Nelson might be a bit more valuable to you than if you want to be more of a spread team that throws 40 times a game. So those are the kind of considerations you've got there. I think the one thing that might hurt Quentin Nelson, Kenny, more than anything else, is that you're going to get at the end of the first round a handful of really good guards who you could perhaps trade up for quite a cheap move up. So the Giants at 34, for example, are probably going to take a guard at some point in this draft, having missed out on Andrew Norwell. They're probably going to take one to pair next to Nate Solder. So what are they going to do? Are they going to take Quentin Nelson at number 2? Probably not. Are they going to move up from number 34 into the back end of the first round and look at someone like Will Hernandez, for example, or Isaiah Wynn, who's an exceptional player, or Austin Corbett, who's from Nevada, who's extremely underrated? You know, they're just 3 of the names that you could look at. Could be a Braden Smith, could be a Frank Ragnow, could be a Billy Price. You know, there's a lot of really good interior offensive linemen in this draft, and that might hurt Quentin Nelson a little bit. That teams will say, well, okay, I can get Saquon here, or I can get Bradley Chubb here, or I can get Denzel Ward or Tremaine Edmonds or one of those players here instead of Quentin Nelson. And then we'll move up from 33, 34, 35, 36 into the bottom end of the first round. We'll give up a 4th round pick or a 5th round pick, and we'll get our guard there. I can see teams sort of weighing that option up rather than taking Quentin Nelson in the top 5 or 10.
And just, I'm curious if we're just looking at, because we are looking at the top of the draft where you have your worst teams, and just looking at the original draft order without any trades considered, let me list out the top 8 teams: the Browns, the Giants, the Colts, the Texans, the Broncos, the Jets, the Bucks, and the Bears. Looking at those 8 teams, Rob, and knowing what we know from free agency a little bit, knowing where they were last year, maybe some of them had bad injuries, maybe them were unlucky, and knowing that what you kind of assume what they're going to draft in these places, whether it's a quarterback, which could take a year or 2 to develop, or a player that's going to have an impact right away. Browns, Giants, Colts, Texans, Broncos, Jets, Bucks, Bears. Who do you think has the best shot at making the playoffs out of that group?
That's quite an interesting question. I mean, I think that if the Giants have got an opportunity to right themselves, because they were a 10-win team that went to, you know, the floor completely disappeared. I think they've got a better coaching setup now, and a GM who was not the most popular with some of the players that he worked with in Carolina, but certainly got the Panthers moving. So I think that with a good draft, the Giants could get back on track quite quickly. So I would think that they, and also they're in a division, the NFC East, where it's pretty much a different team every year, isn't it, that ends up winning it. Obviously, the Eagles won the Super Bowl and presumably will be strong again this year, but how often do you see a team win a Super Bowl and then maybe just take a step back the next year? And the year before that, Dallas were a 13-win team. They came back into the pack a little bit last year. So you sort of see these teams constantly in the NFC East kind of recycling. So I wonder if the Giants might make a quick jump there. As to the others, hard to be that optimistic about the rest. It seems strange, but Cleveland, with the moves that they've made and the sheer number of picks that they've got, could get in there. And I suppose you could say the Colts, if Andrew Luck actually was on the field, would have an opportunity in an AFC South, which is still pretty open. I know the Jaguars had a great run in the playoffs, but you know, they didn't pull away from that division last year, and there's still an opportunity there for the other teams to compete, especially Houston if Deshaun Watson can recover. So and they're going to be a team, the Texans as well, that could definitely be competitive there. I mean, how great did Watson look before he got his knee injury there? And I can remember finding out, I just got off the plane in Seattle actually to fly over and watch the Redskins game. And the first thing I did was look on Twitter, and the breaking news had just popped up that Deshaun Watson had torn his ACL, and how disappointing that was, given the way that the Seahawks had had played him that I think was the week before, and to hear that news. So if he can make a full recovery with what he showed and with maybe some of the moves that they've made, they could get there. The only thing that's going to work against the Texans is they don't have a pick in the first 2 rounds of the draft, so they don't really have an opportunity there to load up on some young talent this year.
Yeah, that's the downside for the Texans for sure. And yeah, with the Colts, so much depends on the health of the quarterback, and if they're not gonna get another quarterback, or if they're gonna, it's interesting. Do you sit in any sort of position with the Indianapolis Colts? They are making, changes to the coaching staff that they've made, and they feel good about Chris Ballard as the GM. So I think the people that are there right now can feel secure for the next year or two, at least. But do you feel that the Colts are in a position now? I mean, they've already opted out of the top 3, obviously, and we can say for good reason. But this is a draft with, it's rare that you get a draft with maybe 4 quarterbacks that in the right year could go in the top 2. If Baker Mayfield was the best quarterback in this draft and nobody doubted it, he could very well go number 1. And, for any team that's sitting in there, that's why I think if the Giants pass on a quarterback, it's a little insane, because it's so rare to even get the opportunity to draft one that would be considered a franchise quarterback. And with the way that the salary cap is and the way that rookie pay scales are, if you get the opportunity to, we've seen the positive benefits of Jared Goff and Carson Wentz and Russell Wilson and Cam Newton and Andrew Luck and so many guys that in this pay scale, if they can be a positive enforcement on the offense and cost $6 or $7 million, it's such a huge benefit that I don't think you can pass on a quarterback if you're in a position to draft one, even if it's a maybe. So that's where I stand on it. But with the Colts, there is no Andrew Luck didn't play last year, and it almost feels like we kind of forget that a guy that the NFL was sort of centering themselves around as the next Peyton Manning didn't even play last year. Any concerns do you think that the Colts would have with that? Do you think that Andrew Luck will, obviously you can't say if Andrew Luck will return, but any thoughts here that they could be making a mistake by not reinforcing that quarterback position, or it's like you just have to trust that your $24 million quarterback is going to be there, and if he's not, you're kind of screwed anyway?
Well, I think it really depends on the players in the draft class. If Indianapolis had a chance to draft another player who was graded as highly as Andrew Luck, then maybe you would consider it. But just because quarterbacks are there, and just because quarterbacks in the media are talked about going in the top 10, it doesn't mean that the teams will view them that way. I mean, I read a lot of the stuff that's out there, and there seems to be mixed opinions on Josh Allen. Some people think that he's got such a fantastic physical profile and so much potential that he could even go number 1 overall to Cleveland. And it's a very realistic proposition there. Now that they had Tyrod Taylor and could sit Josh Allen for a year or two and allow him to develop and become what he's capable of. And then some people will say that the accuracy issues at Wyoming were a major issue there and that it would scare them off taking him that early. Some people like Sam Darnold for the character and the production that he had at USC, but then others will say he's got a long release and that he turned the ball over too often. There seems to be quite a consensus actually on Josh Rosen's character issues there and some of the problems that he had at UCLA. And then you've got Jim Mora coming out this week saying that he'd take Sam Darnold number 1 overall if he was the Cleveland Browns and not Josh Rosen. So you've got all of that. And then you've got Baker Mayfield, and some people will like Baker Mayfield's competitiveness. Some will think that maybe he's a bit of a jerk, and who knows? I mean, I don't know how different teams and different owners will view what he did in the sideline against Kentucky differently. Some will just sort of see it as competitive fire. Some will see it as majorly disrespectful, and they won't want him doing that on their sideline if they draft him in the top 10. And others will look at his size, which is not ideal, and think, well, he's not, I'd happily take him in the late first or the second or the third, but I don't want to, I'm a GM. I don't want to nail my colors to him for my career. That's the other thing that people have to consider here. So the Colts, for example, might look at Josh Allen and say, we love him, but is he going to be there at number 3? No, he's not. So there's nothing we can do. And that's kind of how you have to view this. And I think it's the same with the Giants. I'd fully agree with you, Kenny. If the Giants see a quarterback that they love at number 2, and given Eli Manning's age, it would make a great deal of sense to to sort of do what Indianapolis did back in the day and draft a young quarterback and transition from Eli to the new one. But if they don't see a quarterback, and it's the same with the Colts, if they just don't see a quarterback in this draft that is worth taking there, or they only see one and they go to Cleveland, then I don't think you force it. I think you've just got to look at it. And I think that's what the Colts have decided. I think they've decided that the picks are better, that they've moved down, and they've got a chance to build around Andrew Luck now with some great young talent. And as I said, second round is going to be a fantastic round in this draft this year.
See, I'm almost at the point in my whatever you want to call it. I don't want to say draft evaluation. I'm almost at the point where I almost believe that instead of looking for a quarterback, and in many cases any prospect, but specifically a quarterback, instead of looking for one that you love, if you're picking in the top 3 and there's ones that are, regarded as being, of that ilk, of that caliber, instead of looking for the one that you love, is there one that you don't dislike? Is there one that you're fine with? Because I'm almost to the point where I think it is so unpredictable. We know so little about how prospects will transition to the next level. There's no doubt that first round picks are more successful than second round picks, are more successful than fifth round picks. There's no doubt that the talent wins out. And we even see it going from the high school level to the pros. Jadeveon Clowney could be the best recruit coming out of high school and, is developing into one of the best pass rushers in the NFL after being a no-doubter at number 1 in the draft a couple of years ago. We know who's talented. And that's like, if you're a quarterback and it's like, hey, Josh Rosen was the number 1 recruit coming out of high school. He had his moments at UCLA. He's still got physical talents and things that we like about him. And it's like, unless you hate this guy, which, hey, there probably were a lot of teams that hated Aaron Rodgers for his personality or whatever. It's almost like I think the best GMs sort of release any sort of guise of invincibility in terms of getting these things right. Nobody is getting these things right more than 50% of the time. It's like you're making your best guesses. And if there was any one person in NFL history who knew exactly how every prospect would turn out at the next level, we would put that person up as we would name Canton after him. We would name the Hall of Fame after that person. Bill Belichick makes a ton of mistakes. He just does a lot of other things right. So to me, it's almost like, don't look for the quarterback that you love. Look for the guy that you're like, yeah, I don't hate this guy. I could work with this guy, and there's got to be a quarterback at 2 for that. Do you think does this make, for someone like yourself who has evaluated thousands of prospects over the last 10 years or what have you, and felt really great about a quarterback that didn't turn out, or really poorly about a quarterback that did turn out? Like, how much do you feel the predictability is there at this stage in 2018?
No, it's very difficult to judge who's going to be a success and who isn't. I mean, you only have to go back to the way the Browns traded out of number 2 a couple of years ago to avoid taking Carson Wentz as a good guide there as to how difficult it can be. They wanted Jared Goff or they were willing to trade down, whereas the Eagles actually traded up twice. They moved from like 13 to 8, then from 8 to 2 in a big move to go and get Carson Wentz, and the rest's history there. But what I will say about this draft class, which is a little bit of a counter to what you said there, there's only one GM in the top 8 picks who can feel secure in their position right now. And that's John Elway at Denver, because he's won a Super Bowl and because he's John Elway. The rest, Cleveland have swapped GMs pretty much every year since the owners took over there. And John Dorsey will know that he's probably on a short leash. So he's got to get this right. And I think they will take a quarterback. I think that's pretty much determined there. For Dave Gettleman, I don't think that if he doesn't feel very strongly about one of these quarterbacks, the New York media will not forgive him for making a mistake on this. And he has to get it right, because if not, he'll be short-lived. At the Jets, Mike McCann might be fired next year if he doesn't get this right. They're going to take a quarterback, though. You've got Cleveland again there. You've got Indianapolis. The GM's not had a great start last year. He's now They couldn't land Josh McDaniels. They've had to make go for what might be their plan B, C, D, or whatever it is. You know, they're not feeling particularly strong about this. The owner's probably still committed to Andrew Luck. Tampa Bay, the GM, could easily be fired within the next year because they've stalled after taking Jameis Winston. And in Chicago, their GM's on borrowed time a little bit as well. So I that something has to play into your mind a little bit there. As a GM, you never get more tagged than the minute you take a quarterback. That's your guy. You could take a guard and get it wrong, and no one says, "Oh, you're the guy who took that guard." But if you take Christian Ponder in the first round, then you're the guy who took Christian Ponder. If you're the guy who took Blaine Gabbert in the first round, you're the guy who took Blaine Gabbert in the first round. So that does weigh on the mind a little bit there. It doesn't mean that it's right. And sometimes I'm sure that there'll be teams in this draft who do draft quarterbacks, and they might not be thinking this guy's the second coming of Andrew Luck or Peyton Manning or Russell Wilson or whoever. They probably will take them because they've got a good feeling about them. That no doubt will happen, Kenny. But for some GMs, they might be a little bit more cautious, especially the ones in the first year of a potential rebuild here. They might think, look, I'm not crazy about any of these guys, but I absolutely love Bradley Chubb or Saquon Barkley or one of the other players, Tremaine Edmonds or whatever. And if you're at the start of a rebuild rather than 2 or 3 years in like the Jets, then you might be willing to play this out a little bit more, especially if you think you've got 2, 3, 4 years at this and quarterbacks are available every year. I mean, everybody says the next class isn't going to be very good, and the next class always ends up being 3 or 4 options in there. So, and there will be some options next year as well. So I think that some teams might take a long-term view on it, but I get what you're saying, but I think some teams will do that. Essentially, they will take quarterbacks they don't absolutely love.
Moving into the NFC West, kind of talking about some of the NFC West opponents that the Seahawks are going to be looking at. We move outside of that top 8 to the 49ers at number 9. The 49ers went 6-10 last year following a 1-10 start. Of course, went 5-0 when Jimmy Garoppolo starting. And a lot of people have locked San Francisco into that number 2 position in the NFC West behind the LA Rams, pushing the Seattle Seahawks to 3, if not number 4, for a lot of people, whether they don't like the Seahawks or do like the Seahawks and are just pessimistic, thinking that the 49ers have locked themselves in to that number 2 position with Jimmy Garoppolo and Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. But I still look at the 49ers roster, and I think if the right player was there at number 9 and you have them trading down to 11 and taking Minkah Fitzpatrick, but if the right player was there at these positions, you know, you could argue them taking a receiver, that they have a huge need at receiver, an offensive lineman where Joe Staley is one of the oldest offensive linemen / non-QBs in the NFL. Jonathan Cooper is competing with Laken Tomlinson, and Zane Beadles and Josh Garnett are competing at guard, and you know, tight end is George Kittle, and running back, they're paying Jerick McKinnon $10.5 million next year, and linebacker, where Reuben Foster's future and certainly his next season is in doubt, and Malcolm Smith is a known liability for Seahawks fans, and cornerback, where they've got Richard Sherman on one side but nobody on the other side, and you know, they're starting Jaquiski Tartt perhaps at strong safety if Eric Reed is still out there. Lots of needs, and you have them with Fitzpatrick, who fits in that secondary needs. How good do you think the 49ers actually are right now, and what are some possibilities that you see for them in the draft?
Well, it's still the same 49ers team that struggled for the most part last season, with the exception that, you know, the quarterback came in and just seemed to give everybody a lift. And it goes to show how important that quarterback position is, that when Garoppolo came in, all of a sudden this was a team that was being beaten every single week. They became an actual competitive team, and they went toe-to-toe with the Jaguars and put a ton of points against that Jaguars defense. So they looked legitimate for the first time. And once you get the quarterback, it is funny how things do come together. And they've got some talent, and they're working it out. You know, Kyle Shanahan's reshaping this roster and trying to get players that fit his system. I think the receivers they've got will work into the way they do it. They've got a lot of speed out there. I think that Jerick McKinnon he will be more successful for San Francisco than he would be for other teams. And I'll be interested to see how Kyle Shanahan uses him. the offensive line could use a bit of extra work. It's a bit long in the tooth in some positions. You know, Joshua Garnett's not really worked out for them, I don't think, so far, but they did bring in Weston Richburg to play centre. You're right about Joe Staley. You know, how much longer is he going to be there? And they do have some other needs in the secondary, and I still think they need a bit of an edge rusher there. They've got a lot of very similar defensive linemen, and I know they've got a Tachu from LA Chargers that has come across to San Francisco, but they probably still need a really good edge rusher as well. So they've got some pieces there. They are going to be competitive because of Garoppolo. They've definitely got a chance to become the second team in the NFC West. But you know that they've still got to go out there and prove it. They've got a few early picks in this draft as well, which could help them move closer to that. But they might not be the second best team just yet, but they're certainly trending in the right direction. I think you have to say that.
Yeah, it's an interesting scenario that they've been in with their previous, you know, with all the changes they had at head coach since firing Harbaugh. They ended up with Eric Armstead in the first round, and then DeForest Buckner in the first round, and then Solomon Thomas in the first round. So that's 3 successive years with first round defensive linemen. Do you see Armstead sticking around? Even, let's say, do you see the possibility that Armstead wouldn't be there next season if they found a trade partner and if it doesn't fit? Or do you see him having a long-term future there? And how did you think Solomon Thomas's rookie year really went?
Well, I didn't watch every game, but from what I saw about Solomon Thomas, it was a bit of an underwhelming rookie season. Didn't quite hit the heights that people would have hoped for. And the concern they've got is I think DeForest Buckner out of the 3 has probably had the best start to his career. Armstead's been a bit underwhelming. Thomas has been a little bit underwhelming, and they've got a lot of players that are very, very similar there. And that's the problem that I think that they've got. There's not much variety. And if they could swap one of those for a really good dynamic edge rusher, that they'd probably do it. I'm not sure they're going to be able to get that kind of player in this draft class because they're not high enough to get up towards Bradley Chubb, for example, who could have been a real menace for that team. And thank goodness they're not going to be in anywhere near the range to get Saquon Barkley. Let's hope they don't trade up and get him, because him paired with Jerick McKinnon and that Kyle Shanahan offense would take some stopping. So I'm not too sure on Armstead. I'm not sure what his value would be. I've not seen enough of him week to week to determine whether or not he could be expendable or whether they'll try and trade him. But they're in a position at the moment with the cap room that they've got and the moves that they're making that they can probably let this play out for a little bit longer. And given that he's not been moved so far, I don't think it's going to happen this year. And he'll have another chance to impress next season, I imagine.
Yeah, and I mean, you know what I would say about the possibility of the 49ers trading up for Saquon Barkley? I mean, totally opposite. Please, please, please. I would love for the 49ers to trade up for Saquon Barkley and give up multiple first-round picks to do it. So that's just, I mean, that's a debate that people are having all over. So
but if you want to see the San Francisco 49ers become a real threat in the NFC West, then yeah, by all means, hope that happens. But
yeah, by all means. I mean,
he's a terrific player.
Better than using a top 5 pick on a running back. Use 2 first-round picks, including a top 5 on a running back. I'm just gonna see if there's a possibility that maybe. It's a terrible value. Saquon Barkley will be a top 5 paid running back from the time he steps onto the field. Compared to any other position. That won't be true. And it's just, you've said yourself, there's 7 other running backs that could go in the top 75. So if Kyle Shanahan can make it work with Saquon Barkley, if he can turn Jerick McKinnon into this apparent guy that's the second highest paid player in the NFL, why does he even need Saquon Barkley? I mean, just go out and get one of the other 7 running backs, say that it's Kyle Shanahan's system, and you've got yourself a guy that didn't cost you 2 first-round picks and a top 5er. So, I mean, that's still what I would say with Saquon Barkley with any team. If the Giants pick him, they're allowing themselves to fall into 16th place in the NFC because they don't have a quarterback in a year.
Well, it depends I suppose it depends how long Eli goes on for. I mean, he has won 2 Super Bowls, so. I mean, listen, I know that some people that this is a growing trend especially on the internet. The running back position gets. I'm not quite sure why and when this happened. That the running back position suddenly is almost seen like the red-headed stepchild of the NFL. But Saquon Barkley is an incredible and just an absolutely fantastic, sensational player. And I want no part of him in the NFC West, however many picks it costs, however many, how much his salary compares to the other running backs in the NFL. If he's in the NFC West, I only want him playing in navy blue. And I would prefer that he not be in the I'd prefer not be in the division personally.
If Saquon Barkley, Leonard Fournette, Ezekiel Elliott, and Todd Gurley were all in the same draft, you know who I'd take? Any edge rusher. Any edge rusher. I mean, give me someone that is a $10 to $12 million cost savings per season on his rookie deal, has a higher impact, has a lower chance of injury, has a longer career trajectory, is less likely to be replaced by a third-round pick. I mean, there's so many lists of reasons. If there's a reason why you don't take a punter and a kicker in the first round or the second round or third round, then certainly positional value has to come into play. And if the NFL has dictated, as it has, that the running back positional value is close to the bottom of the entire league at any position, which the NFL has dictated, not anybody else. The NFL has dictated that because Le'Veon Bell can't get a contract longer than one season. That any running back pretty much that goes on the free agent market, whether you're DeMarco Murray or just anybody, isn't going to get more than $6 million. This is what the NFL has dictated, and they've dictated since the 2011, whatever that stretch was, where there were no running backs in the first round, barely, for 3 or 4 years, and then suddenly now we get one or two, maybe at most two. That become hot topics. Christian McCaffrey going 7th overall only because, he was really just a slot receiver. And there's just, in Leonard Fournette, did not have an impact on the Jaguars in the way that a lot of people assumed that he would. The Jaguars should have taken the Jaguars should have taken a quarterback, and that is obvious as it is then as it is today. I mean, Leonard Fournette's impact on the field last year with the Jaguars was not as much as it should have been when compared to his backups that played when he was out. Because when he was out, the Jaguars were fine.
Yeah. I mean, Kenny, I love you. I disagree with you overwhelmingly on this. And just quickly on Leonard Fournette, I think the one thing that Fournette did, which cannot be underestimated, is that he just so much he set the tone for the team that, I mean, they don't have Blake Bortles has had some decent games. He's not as bad as people were saying a year ago. That's been proven now. But the one thing that Jacksonville had was this style of play, which, funnily enough, is what the Seahawks want to do, which is have this just incredibly tough, opportunistic defense paired with a great running game. And they had the defense, but until Leonard Fournette was there with his running style, and sometimes that's the thing that Marshawn Lynch brought to Seattle. Sometimes Marshawn Lynch would have a 50 or 60-yard rushing game. And I actually went and had a look at this a few weeks ago. I think even in 2013, I think the first game of the season was against Carolina, which Seattle won. I think it was about 13-9 or something like that. They won the first game. And Lynch had about 50 or 60 yards. But it was the fact that it's just his attitude and everything. It just brought the culture of the team was because of the guy who was playing running back. And it just created this toughness about Seattle. And also, you just saw it week to week. Teams would have to fight. First and foremost, you walk into the office on a Monday, and the first thing you have to do is stop Marshawn Lynch. And you don't even get on to how you're going to contain Russell Wilson with him scrambling out the pocket until Tuesday or Wednesday, because you've had to find a way to stop Lynch first. And then off the back of that, you've got the great defense that you've got to try and take advantage of, which is really difficult in Seattle. And when Pete Carroll talks about it all starts with a run, that's why he says it. And that's what Leonard Fournette brought to Jacksonville. And it's a culture and it's an attitude and it's about, this is who we are going to be. And when Seattle won their Super Bowl, if you notice, one of the big reasons they beat Denver that day is because Denver spent 2 weeks trying to stop Marshawn Lynch, and they did, but they didn't stop anything else because Seattle's defense and Russell Wilson stepped up to the plate because Denver's focus was on stopping Marshawn.
And
And
yet,
that, it is so important to certain teams. Now, some teams want to throw it 40 times. That's their prerogative. There's many ways to win in the NFL. Some teams want to play hard-nosed running game and defense, and that is what the Seahawks and the Jaguars now want to do.
But and yet, with Chris Ivory's 3 starts last season, they won 23-7, 27-0, and 45-7. So, I mean, they went 7-6 with Leonard Fournette, and they went 3-0 and blew out those 3 teams with Chris Ivory. And I don't think that it seems a step too far to say that Leonard Fournette deserves credit, even when he wasn't on the field, because he changed the culture. If your entire culture of your entire franchise can be changed by a single rookie running back, that anyone besides a quarterback, if the entire culture can be changed by that player, you have a super weak franchise. You have
no. I mean, Seattle's culture was all born through Marshawn. I mean, everything's
Carroll is Seattle's culture.
No, it all came together with, I mean, Marshawn. I think if you spoke to Richard Sherman and Cam and people like that, I mean, I'm speaking here like I've had that conversation. I obviously haven't, but you know, if you spoke to those guys and Michael Bennett and people like that and said, what was the foundation of this team? They would say Marsh. I think Michael Bennett actually said that last week.
I mean, I don't know if I would really care, because the Seahawks didn't do anything in 2010 and 2011. And when Russell Wilson came in, that's when they were successful. And they can hate Russell Wilson from here to tomorrow. It doesn't change the fact that Russell Wilson was what changed the fortunes of the franchise.
Russell Wilson, what Russell provided was the needed quarterback. I mean, I would never suggest that a quarterback is an irrelevance, but this is the problem I have with this debate and this argument, is that, you know, what we're talking about here is we're trying to sort of just, oh no, you know, running back's never that important, or the role of a running back. A running back can be very, very important to a team. It doesn't mean that they're the only important position. It doesn't mean that they're more important than the quarterback. Can they change a culture of a team? Yes, they definitely can. Can a team who wants to run the ball first and foremost benefit from a star running back? Yes. It's not going to be the way every team wins, and you can have success with some of the running backs, but you can also find a quarterback in round 6. You can also find a pass rusher from trading Rob Sims to the Philadelphia Eagles and getting Chris Clemens in a, you know, there's a million different ways to win a football game. Would I rather have, for example, rookie J.J. Watt or rookie Zeke Elliott? Well, I'd have rookie J.J. Watt. Would I rather have rookie Zeke Elliott or rookie, I don't know, Whitney Merciless? Then I would rather have rookie Zeke Elliott. And I think it's just about judging the players, judging your team, drafting for your team, and going at it through that. The point on Saquon is I don't care how much his contract salary is compared to the rest. Le'Veon Bell's got his head in the clouds because he wants to be paid like a running back and a receiver. I mean, he's on the record saying that. I think he wants something like $18 million a year or something, which is why there's been no movement there. And the Steelers are incredibly strict, and they do a great job with their contracts, and especially the guaranteed money as well. I don't really care how much Saquon. I just don't want to face him twice. It's bad enough that David Johnson and Todd Gurley are going to be running at a very different looking defensive line next year. I don't want to face Saquon as well.
Well, speaking of the Arizona Cardinals, we can move down to the other another NFC West opponent. After you get through San Francisco, you've had Miami trading up for Baker Mayfield. You've got the Raiders taking Tremaine Edmonds, the Niners taking Minkah Fitzpatrick. At this point, you have the Browns, by way of trading down, taking Mike McGlinchey, which was the second offensive lineman off the board, the first tackle, and a guy that we talked about a lot last year before he decided not to come out for the draft. Then Leighton Vander Esch goes to Washington at 13. The Packers take Marcus Davenport, a pass rusher you've talked about a lot on Seahawks Draft Blog recently, at 14. And then you've got the Cardinals taking Lamar Jackson, which would bring in another quarterback to the NFC, another quarterback to the NFC West. We've talked a lot about the NFC and how huge of an advantage they have over the AFC right now, because really every team in the NFC, the weakest ones are the Arizona Cardinals with Sam Bradford and the backup, Mike Glennon. Then you've got the Giants with Eli Manning, who's 37, 38. And then you've got The Bears with Mitch Trubisky, who at least was the second overall pick last year, could get a lot better. And then everyone else, has got a lot of good things going on for them. And those other teams, like I said, the Giants could turn it around right now by drafting a quarterback. And they may still have a good quarterback with Manning next season, depending. I think a lot of that depends on the situation with Odell Beckham if he comes back, because Manning has played at his best and in his entire career in the 3 years with Odell Beckham, and that's pretty much that fell apart last year. So the Cardinals here being able to get, if they do get Lamar Jackson, finally, at this point, what kind of quarterback do you think they're really getting? And would he win that job over Sam Bradford? Is Arizona in a position where they're just going to be like, what are we doing? Trying to figure out, we know what Sam Bradford is and we know what we are. Let's put Lamar Jackson in there, or is this going to take some time?
I think I wouldn't really want to, talking of players I wouldn't really want to see in the NFC West. I think Lamar Jackson would be another one. I think it's just such a dynamic player. And because the Cardinals are a strange team in a weird situation, because they were pretty bad last year and they managed to scrape their way to 8-8. If they hadn't have won the game against Seattle, they would have been 2 picks higher up. But if they'd actually managed to finish 6-10, for example, because their strength of schedule was so weak, I mean, it was 4.488, which would have actually, if they'd have only lost 6 games, they would have been well within the top 10 and would have been in position really to get at one of these young quarterbacks in the top 10. So, they could be a more threatening looking team there. At the very least, they would have been in position to get one of the legit first rounders. But they're going to be in a situation at 15 where they've got probably 3 options, you could say. They can either try and trade up aggressively and spend multiple picks to get into the top 5 and get one of the the big 4, if you want to call them that, at quarterback. They can accept that they're not going to get that and they're not going to get into the range for the top ones. They've brought in Bradford and Glennon and just say, okay, look, let's just accept the situation for what it is and try and build another position on the team. For example, their offensive line is looking pretty weak. They could probably use a bit of defensive help as well. So that could be another option for them. Or they buy into Lamar Jackson as a prospect. Now, Jackson's going to need a head coach, a GM, and an offensive coordinator who are willing to embrace exactly what he's all about and the style of player that he is. And some teams won't want to do that. They'll want the quarterback to come in and play probably a very orthodox system. With Lamar Jackson, you can forget that. There's no point playing a very orthodox NFL offense with Jackson. If you tailor your offense around him and to what he is, and you're willing to be open-minded about it, he can be one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in the league. We'll see if Arizona's quite as ambitious as that. They might not be. There's also a possibility that other teams could look to move ahead of Arizona to get at Lamar Jackson, because it seems as all the quarterbacks get bunched up a little bit, there is the possibility that another team will try and leapfrog them to get at Lamar Jackson. He's going to go a bit higher, I think, than people perhaps expected initially, just because of the way the quarterbacks are rising. So some big decisions coming up for Arizona. I think everybody should hope, though, that one way or another, the Seahawks are facing people like Sam Bradford and Glennon next year rather than someone like Lamar Jackson, because he's a very, very talented quarterback who's only going to get better once he gets NFL coaching.
And, getting down to the LA Rams, they pick at 23rd. And you have them taking Harold Landry. The Rams, certainly it seems they've added a lot of talent. I mean, this doesn't seem they have added a lot of talent, and it seems that their biggest holes would be at the linebacker position and perhaps a future at defensive line, knowing that they've signed Damakung Suh, who is 31 and only on a 1-year deal, sort of like when the Patriots signed Darrelle Revis to a de facto 1-year contract before they went to the Super Bowl and won it. They've got Ethan Westbrooks and Morgan Fox and Dominic Easley, and Michael Brockers is making $11 million. And then the linebackers, just a bunch of guys that a lot of people haven't heard of before, myself included. Mark Barron, I don't know if he's lived up to an $11 million contract, but they've added Marcus Peters, Aqib Talib, who's going to be 32 with the Rams. And they also have, questions at offensive line where, Saffold and Brown and Havenstein, I think, are all free agents after the year. Sullivan and Whitworth are 2 of the oldest offensive linemen in the NFL. Thoughts on the needs for the Rams in the first round, and how much better do you think the Rams will be next year than they were last year, given the additions they made, given potential progress from certain players, having been 11-5, knowing that I also think that they also have a very difficult schedule, as all teams in the NFC West do. How do you feel about the Rams right now?
Well, I think they've had a terrific offseason. You have to accept that they have. I mean, looking at some of the moves that they've made already, they did make the big trade for Sammy Watkins in the way that Seattle made the big trade for Sheldon Richardson. The difference is Richardson's gone away for an $8 million contract of a 1 year that won't provide a third-round comp pick for the Seahawks, and the Rams let Sammy Watkins go for a $16 million contract, and they are going to get a third-round comp pick. So their rental worked. Seattle's didn't. They bring in Ndamukong Suh instead, and because he was cut by Miami, he's no threat to their comp pick situation there. So they've not threatened that. In the past, the Seahawks have made big trades for people like Percy Harvin and Jimmy Graham. The Rams make a big trade for Marcus Peters, and essentially it cost them chump change at the back end of the draft. And if Peters ends up being an enormous headache for them, and they just want to move on from him at the end of his contract, end of his rookie contract, they can do. And no one will fault them for making that deal and moving on, because he may still end up getting paid in free agency. They might end up getting another third-round comp pick there. So the chances they are taking are all calculated chances. And because they don't have to pay the quarterback, and because they still don't have to pay Aaron Donald, I mean, whether or not that Donald situation will come to the fore, the fact that he's earning such a small amount of money is pretty much a joke. You would think that the Rams would just pony up there and pay the guy what he needs. But while he's there and Goff's there on his cheap deal and Gurley's there on his rookie deal, then you've just got to doff your cap to them and say they have built a really interesting looking roster. And they have to be the favourites in the NFC West. They'll be one of the top two favourites in the NFC, probably with Minnesota. And they're going to take some stopping. I think they are going to be even better. They've done a great job of making sure that it's not going to fall on Jared Goff for them necessarily. Their defense is going to be amazing. Wade Phillips is going to have a defensive front which matches the one that he had in Denver when they won the Super Bowl not so long ago. Gurley's fantastic. They've got weapons elsewhere. The scheme just fits around everything. McVay's a very good offensive coach, and it doesn't put too much pressure on Goff. And I'm really, really worried that they're going to end up spending that 23 pick on Odell Beckham Jr., which would make it even worse, because then that's another player who comes in there. Yes, they'd have to pay him. Yes, they'd have to find a way to make that fit. It's probably unlikely, but until that gets absolutely ruled out completely, then I'm going to be a little bit concerned about that. Their big needs, I think Robert Quinn being traded to Miami has created a bit of a hole as an outside rusher, and they need someone who can do that. And that's why I went with Harold Landry there, just because he seems to fit what Wade Phillips looks for in those sort of outside linebacker rusher types. And the other position that they probably need to look at is linebacker in general. The best ones in my mock draft had already gone. Leighton Vander Esch, people like that had already gone off the board. Roquan Smith as well, who I don't think really fits Wade Phillips' scheme in the 3-4 because he gets bullied a bit too much by offensive linemen up the middle. So I think that outside rusher or linebacker will be the targets, and I think perhaps someone like Harold Landry in that range would make some sense for them.
Yeah, speaking of Leighton Vander Esch, we have a 7-round Seahawks mock draft posted on Field Goals today by Stuffer, Stufr. Posted a 7-round mock. He's done a few of these now, and he always looks for different players every time. He never wants to talk about the same player twice. So there's other considerations they're making. He's not trying to make the best draft. He's just trying to look at potential guys at every position. He's also always doing trades because he believes that Seahawks will make a trade regardless. And in this case, Rob, he's got the Seahawks trading pick 18 and pick 168 to the Falcons for pick 26 and pick 90. And then he's got the Seahawks taking pick 26 and trading that to the Colts for 36 and 104. And at the top of the second round, he takes Leighton Vander Esch out of Boise State. And then with their new 3rd-round pick that they acquired, tight end Hayden Hurst out of South Carolina. With the Seahawks in mind, what are your thoughts on Leighton Vander Esch and Hayden Hurst?
Oh, I think Leighton Vander Esch is going to go in the top 20. I don't think there's much doubt there at all. I mean, he's just a fantastic player, had one of the better combines, and compares very, very, very favorably. Did a post on this not so long ago to all of the top linebackers: Luke Kuechly, Bobby Wagner, you can go back to people like Thomas Davis. His physical profile is identical to many of these top players, in particular Kuechly. So I think that teams, I'd be very, very surprised if he got past both Washington and Green Bay at 13 and 14. And then if he was there for teams like Baltimore and the Chargers, then I would imagine that they would take him off the board as well. So I think the chances of him lasting into the 30s are pretty unlikely, but I think he's a fantastic player, one of the best in this draft. And Hayden Hurst is an older tight end. I think he's going to be a 25-year-old rookie. I think that's what I've seen there. He's 24, 25, 26. He's in that kind of age range there. There are things to like about him. He made some very difficult catches at South Carolina. Has the right mindset. He's been through the system with the baseball and has gone back to football, and will know what it's like to be a pro in that regard as well. And he's not much of a blocker though, and that's the big thing for the Seahawks, is that I don't think they're going to bring in a tight end this offseason the way that everything has gone so far, where they're going to have to teach him how to block. I think they've kind of been there and done that. I think that the tight ends that they're probably going to look at are the people like your Dalton Schultz at Stanford, your Durham Smythe at Notre Dame, your Will Disley at Washington, who's first and foremost they're blockers, and that's what they are. And I think that that's the type they're going to look for as well, because Brian Schottenheimer in the past has not been one. I know a lot of people have talked about fullbacks and stuff like that. And they might incorporate a fullback in this running game, but I think he prefers to use a lot of two tight end sets, or even use the tight end as a fullback. So I think if they could bring somebody in who could do sort of that H-backy type job for them, or do some wide tight end blocking, I think that's probably what they're going to look for. I'm not saying that Hayden Hurst can't do that, but given his age and given that he's probably going to have to learn how to do that, I think they might looking at in a different direction there.
And speaking of different directions, in your latest mock draft, you have the Seahawks trading down from 18 to 31 with the New England Patriots. And then they take Ronald Jones, the running back out of USC that we've talked about quite a bit, a guy that you like quite a bit as well. And then at 63, by picking up that second round pick from the Patriots, Josh Sweat, defensive end out of Florida State. If you have Josh Sweat, where do you see his NFL career starting out as for 2018? Could he be a guy that gets heavy in the rotation? And how long would it take someone like Ronald Jones to be number one on the depth chart?
It's a difficult question to answer, because there are real medical concerns about Josh Sweat, and anybody who's watched his stuff from 2017 will notice that he's wearing a heavy knee brace. His get-off was pretty bad, to be honest. I mean, at the snap, he comes out, and it's like he takes a second after everybody else to set off and get in and attack the offensive tackle, and that is a problem. Now, the reason I paired him with the Seahawks is because there are not many edge rushers who fit what the Seahawks have looked for in previous years. They have looked for fantastic athletes on the defensive line if they're going to draft them early. Malik McDowell was a fantastic athlete for his size. Frank Clark was a fantastic athlete. Bruce Irvin was a fantastic athlete. They've not taken mediocre athletes to play pass rush. And even the ones they've taken later on, people like Oben Gwacham, for example, these are people who have tested very, very well at the combine. And there aren't too many of them. They like the 1.5 10-yard split. It was only really Harold Landry and Josh Sweat who ran that. You can include the linebackers as well. There are quite a few of the linebackers who did it. But in terms of pure edge rush, you're really just sort of looking at Landry and Sweat there. I think there are some other edge rushers that they would possibly be interested in. I wrote a little bit about Marcus Davenport the other day. Wouldn't be totally surprised if they looked at him. There are one or two others as well. But the options are quite limited there. And I think given what the Seahawks have done so far in free agency and looking at the shape of the roster, I do think they're going to take a running back relatively early. I think in the top 50, they will take a running back, because there's a huge drop-off at the position after the first 6 go off the board, and they'll go very early because teams like Washington and Denver have already pretty much stated in public, their head coaches have stated they're going to take a running back in that kind of range. So I think you've got to take one in the top 50 if you're going to take one. And I think that they've got to find another pass rusher. They're pretty well stocked in the middle, but with a depth chart that essentially says Frank Clark, Marcus Smith, Dion Jordan, as talented as he is, can he play 16 games? And then you've got Barkevious Mingo playing as a sort of a Sam Leo. They probably need another edge rusher in there. So if they did go with the running back first, then defensive end later on, they could flip and do it the other way around. But I think that they're probably going to have to look at trying to find a pass rusher somewhere. And if they don't go in the first 2 rounds, maybe they wait a little bit longer and look at someone like Duke Ejiofor, for example, as a possible alternative there. But I do think that there are a couple of positions they're going to look at early. Defensive end for sure, and running back as well.
And, another thing that a lot of Seahawks fans are wondering and talking about is the future of Earl Thomas. And, with regards to talk about trading him for draft picks, Rob, what are your thoughts in terms of a deadline to do that and, what it would take for the Seahawks to make that move?
Well, I think this one's, for me, it seems like if there are interested parties out there, and the only team that ever gets talked about is Dallas. So let's assume that there are other teams. It just seems to me like they've noticed that the Seahawks have made a lot of changes, which they have. They've moved Richard Sherman and Michael Bennett, and have let Sheldon Richardson leave and Jimmy Graham and Paul Richardson. And they seem to be acknowledging that the Seahawks seem to be on a bit of a fire sale here. So then when the Seahawks turn around and go, we want a first-round pick for Earl Thomas, which is presumably what they've done because that's what the reports have said, the other teams are looking at them and saying, yeah, we don't want to spend a first-round pick. And they probably feel like if they wait this out, the price is going to come down eventually because the Seahawks are determined to make some changes here to churn this roster. And that's not a particularly good position from which to sell. You really need teams that are knocking on the door, busting the door down to try and get your player. And if that was going to happen, it would have happened by now. It would have happened right at the start of free agency. You would have had a bidding war of some kind. They would have found a potential suitor and then they would have been traded. So it looks as if teams are trying to wait the Seahawks out. Now, I wrote a post about this last week where essentially I said that they should use this week at the owners' meeting as some kind of a deadline to say, listen, this is either happening on our terms now or it's not happening at all. And I don't know how realistic that is. If you put that to John Schneider, I imagine he would laugh it off and say, you can't do that for this, that, the other reason. But I'm not an NFL GM, never have been, never will be. So I'm just sort of talking here as a blogger who has made that suggestion. But for me, it seems a little bit like the Seahawks need to take control of the situation. If teams are waiting them out, then the Seahawks need to say, no, we want to deal in this window. We've got to plan for what we're going to do. We don't want to be trying to trade Earl Thomas 2 days before the draft or during the draft or something like that. We want to be able to spend the next month knowing exactly where we are and knowing what we want to do. And that would probably mean setting some kind of a deadline. Now, all of the teams are at the owners' meeting this week. They would have, if any teams are still interested in Earl Thomas, presumably they would have talked to John Schneider and Pete Carroll about this while they've all been in the same place in Orlando. And yet here we are, it's Wednesday now, and still nothing has emerged. We've seen some trades happen this week. We saw Cody Kessler get traded. So we're seeing things moving while the owners are together and the GMs and the coaches. So the fact that nothing has happened yet makes me think that the meeting hasn't shifted this along and then it's going to drag on even further. But that doesn't seem like a particularly good thing for the Seahawks. And while ever they don't sort of start setting deadlines and trying to take control of the matter and trying to be the aggressor as opposed to the one who everybody's waiting to lower the price, I'm a little bit worried that they're going to get to a point in this where they just take the best offer that's out there. And that worries me a little bit because, last year with Richard Sherman, they held on to him because the offers weren't great. And then they ended up cutting him and getting nothing for him in a year's time. And if they don't trade Earl Thomas, there's absolutely zero indication they're going to extend him. Is he just going to leave next year? And are they going to end up getting a possible 4th-round comp pick for him down the line? Is that really how we want Earl Thomas's career to fizzle out in Seattle? One more year after all this talk and then just letting him walk as a free agent. And they could use the franchise tag, I guess. But it does feel like this is trending one way that he's going to leave. And I think all fans just want to know what's going on. They want to know whether he's staying, whether he's going. There's a lack of clarity there. It's painful because it's about such a legendary player. And I think we all want to know what's going on. But I'm a little bit worried that teams are waiting out the Seahawks in the hope that they can try and steal Earl Thomas for a 2nd-round pick or a 3rd-round pick. And if that's the case, and if the Seahawks keep waiting this out, we'll have to see what they can actually get for Earl Thomas. But if they're only talking about a 1st and a 3rd for Odell Beckham Jr., I think the hope that they're going to get a 1st-round pick for Earl Thomas, those hopes are probably waning a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's about all of the topics that I have here today for 3000 NFL Mock Draft. As usual, Rob, I give you your final statement, your final words, anything else that you want to say as we, approach the 1 month countdown from now to the 2018 NFL Draft.
Well, the one final thing I would say is that I know that there'll be Seahawks fans out there who may even be listening to this who feel a little bit down at the moment because the Rams are making all these big, high-profile moves, and a lot of the big-name Seahawks players have left. We may even see Earl Thomas leave as well. But if I could sort of finish on a slightly positive note, I would suggest that this draft, if it's set up for one team pretty well, it is the Seahawks. It's particularly strong at the front end on players that can help you fix your running game, which Pete Carroll has said again this week is their priority to get that running game fixed. So they've got an opportunity to do that. And then in the sort of the middle rounds and the later rounds, there are going to be some great value on young defensive players. And you are going to be able to bring in many young, hungry, competitive defensive players into this team, possibly having addressed positions like tight end for another blocking tight end and running back early. And you're going to be able to get a pass rusher. You're going to be able to fill out the defensive line. I think there's some good linebacker options here, some good options in the secondary as well. And you might not feel that positive or that excited about it now, but I'm telling you, when you get into training camp and you see these young players that they're going to put together from this draft class, there'll be a buzz about this team. And I do think it's really well set up for the Seahawks to sort out their bigger needs and get things moving again. And it might be that 2018 is not a championship season, but I think that this draft has got the potential. It's not going to be great for every team and fitting everyone's needs, but it does fit the Seahawks. And this could be the kind of draft that launches another run. So I'll just bear that in mind if you're feeling a bit down in the dumps at the moment, that the draft is going to be, I think, even though the Seahawks have got to do some work to get some more picks, because they're not going to pick at 18 and then wait all the way to 120. They're going to trade down and get other picks, and we'll see what happens with Earl Thomas. But it could be the kind of draft class that just kickstarts things again in Seattle. So I would urge people to look forward to that and maybe try and be a little bit positive about that, because this could be a great draft for the Seahawks.
There you go. This has been 3000 NFL Mock Draft. You can follow Rob Staton on Twitter at Rob Staton. Go to SeahawksDraftBlog.com. For me, you can go to FieldGoals.com and follow us on Twitter at Field Goals. Subscribe to this show, 3000 NFL Mock Draft, by subscribing to Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur on iTunes. And we'll have more episodes coming between now and the draft in late April. Plenty more to talk about, plenty moves to be made. Free agency, some stuff is still going to move around between now and then, and we'll catch up with all of it. And then we'll talk before, during, and after the draft about what has transpired. That has been this edition of the show. Come back next time for a brand new draft.